This is the Read to Lead podcast, episode 565, May 2025.
What I wanted to do was democratize these steps in such a way that everybody, regardless of what their fix of choice is, could derive the same benefits from those steps that for the past 90 years, people in the rooms of recovery have experienced. They're for everybody.
Did you know that anyone, addicts or non-addicts, that means you, can benefit from working the 12 steps and find the freedom, joy, and intimacy with God that your heart longs for? It's true. Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is the Read to Lead podcast, the podcast dedicated to your personal and professional growth. We all suffer from a sense of spiritual homelessness, according to today's guest, a feeling that we're not fully at home in the world. To cope with our painful feelings and life traumas, we search for quick fixes that eventually become habitual, self-destructive behaviors that ultimately create more problems than they solve. We'll tackle these ideas and more with today's guest, Ian Cron. He's a best-selling author, psychotherapist, Enneagram teacher, Episcopal priest, and the host of the popular podcast Typology, with currently over 20 million downloads. His books include the Enneagram Primer, which I love, called The Road Back to You, an Enneagram Journey to Self-Discovery, which has sold over 1 million copies, the novel Chasing Francis, the spiritual memoir Jesus, My Father, the CIA, and Me, and The Story of You, an Enneagram Journey to Becoming Your True Self. Ian's latest book, which came out in January, is called The Fix, How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. If you long for sustainable healing and joy amid life's messiness, The Fix invites you to journey step by step through a spiritual curriculum that has helped millions overcome trauma, pain, and brokenness for over 8 decades. Understand how the 12 steps can be a transformative tool, not only for people with chemical or behavioral addictions, but for anyone who wants to move beyond self-help to a spiritual awakening. Catch yourself in the act of self-sabotaging behaviors and understand how each day is a new opportunity to trade in self-willed reformation for grace-powered transformation and much, much more. Everybody, Ian says, is addicted to something to numb the discomfort of living in a messed up world. But the good news is that if you committedly work the steps, you will eventually have a spiritual awakening that will give you an entirely new and radically beautiful orientation toward the life God has for you. Ian, I'm a huge fan of The Road Back to You and now a brand new fan of The Fix. Welcome officially to the Read to Lead podcast.
I'm delighted, Jeff. Thank you.
Well, let's jump in and get into right where the book starts, which I think is some good groundwork to lay at this point. And that's rethinking how we define addiction. You defined it a bit more broadly in the opening chapter as a universal human experience and beyond drugs and alcohol, right?
Oh, yeah, well beyond it. As Brene Brown says, we live in the most addicted cohort in human history, right? And it's becoming an ever increasing problem. And yet, when we look back thousands of years, though they might have called the addictions attachments, it's been a part of our, universal struggle from the very beginning. And addictions always diminish us. They affect every domain of our lives. And I wanted to explore the real fix to what aches inside that we try to anesthetize using unwise, unskillful means.
The second chapter, Drinking from the Wrong Well, builds on the first. You get into your own story with addiction. And I think it's a relatable point, an entry point for readers, showing how addiction can start as a coping mechanism before spiraling out of control. Talk a bit about your experiences there.
Yeah. So, yes, I'm in recovery. I've been around the rooms of recovery for many, many, many years. And human beings often, or always really, look to external solutions to solve internal problems. And then eventually our external solutions become bigger problems than the problem they were trying to solve, right? And I try to broaden out this idea of addiction, because our tendency is, in our culture, is to think, oh, it's those people, right? It's drug addicts, it's alcoholics, right? But the fact of the matter is, it's really an us problem. And workaholism, for example, I'm a coach. I do tons of, I'm a trained therapist. I mean, I've seen workaholism do more damage in families, oftentimes than drinking and drugs does.
Wow.
People pleasing, technology, pornography, approval seeking, control in business or in relationships, actually relationship addictions, food, weight, dieting, sports betting, gambling. I mean, the list goes on and on and on here, right? Yeah. Shopping, spending, debt. And so my own experience is more substance use disorder. That was my specialization. And so I know how all of the self-prescribed treatment plans that we come up with to solve our own internal distress can lead to disaster for us. And what I really wanted to do in the fix, and the subtitle kind of says it all, how the 12 steps of recovery offer a surprising path of transformation for the well-adjusted, the down and out, and everyone in between. What I wanted to do was democratize these steps in such a way that everybody, regardless of what their fix of choice is, could derive the same benefits from those steps that for the past 90 years, people in the rooms of recovery have experienced, right? So they're for everybody. And let's just say for a moment, you're really going to dig in your heels and say, I am not an addict, right? Okay, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you. However, if you want to lead a more happy, free, productive, integrated life, okay, well then working the 12 steps would do that for you. So they're just a great spiritual technology that would help anybody.
For those unfamiliar with the 12 steps, step one might seem counterintuitive. Why start with admitting defeat?
Yeah.
You describe it as a sort of a liberating acknowledgement of reality. Talk about how this admitting powerlessness over addiction serves as a critical starting point for recovery.
Yeah, great question. The first step reads, we admitted we were powerless over, now in AA you'd say alcohol, but you could say my workaholism, or how about just my fundamental idolatry, right? That our lives had become unmanageable. Okay. Here's the thing, Jeff, right? I always laugh and tell people, half of us can't sneeze without peeing our pants. So how is it that we could believe that we really have so much power and control over our lives? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, you are a biped on a planet spinning at 67,000 miles an hour through the universe, right? Where, it's absurd to think, I have everything under control. And my life is very manageable. Everybody says that until something comes along that knocks over the blocks, right? Yeah. Our little tower of blocks get knocked over. And then we realize, oh, wait a minute. Now, it's much better to make that admission early on in life, right? Because then what happens is, according to Bill W., who wrote the 12 steps, is that it opens us up. Now, here's a big idea for your listeners who may have immediate objections when I say this. What it does is it opens us up to a spiritual awakening of sufficient force and magnitude that it renders unnecessary our need for external fixes to internal problems. Now, that's a big idea, right? Now, I do not presume that all of your listeners are people who have a religious faith, per se, so that when I talk about a spiritual awakening, that can take many different forms. But really, to understand that we're creatures, not creators. And when you finally get into that space, what happens, and I've heard this a million times, when you admit powerlessness, a new kind of power suffuses you. And you suddenly find that you're able to move through the world with more confidence, clarity, peace of mind, and a kind of hopefulness that there is an alternative to the life that we're living that is better. And so, I mean, it's a spiritual paradox, right? That winning, or let me put it this way, this is going to freak out some of your listeners, but that's all right. and I've seen, I can only speak out of my own experience, but when you admit defeat, that is the beginning of winning. That's when you start to win. I work with a lot of leaders. I work with a lot of people in the corporate sphere. That's the majority of my work. And they too look at me kind of cross-eyed when I say this stuff, but they eventually get it. They eventually get it, that what I'm saying is true and that what the steps are saying is true, and that it would bring real benefit to their lives if they listened.
When I am weak, you are strong, I think is how it goes, right?
Yes, that's the idea, right? Yeah, that's the idea. The recognition of our limitations.
And speaking of spiritual awakening, the next step I want to get into talks about believing in a power greater than ourselves. Most of us have heard that around, the 12 steps. You connect that to moving from despair to hope. How does this step help people, especially those skeptical of spiritual ideas, transition to a state of possibility?
Yeah, well, because step one leaves you in a state of despair.
You have no other choice of them.
Yeah, listen. Like I had a client one time and he said to me, "I'm falling apart, man. Like I'm falling apart." And I went, "Oh, you have no idea. That's good news." Because once you fall apart, man, we can do reconstruction. Then we can build what you really wanted all along. So when we admit that we're powerless over blank, that our lives have become unmanageable, there is this kind of odd relief and also a sense of, well, now what? Now what do I got? Right? I had a client, a successful private equity guy from New York City, and he once said to me after all kinds of things were going wrong in his life. His life was very unmanageable. He was sitting on top of a multi-billion-dollar empire, but marriage, children, health, all kinds of things, his emotional world, unmanageable, completely unmanageable. His words to me were this, and this is a guy, Harvard educated, very, very smart. He says, "Ian, I'm out of ammo." Now, it took about 58 years for him to figure out he was out of ammo. Now, that's a place of kind of both I give up, I surrender, and that's a good place, and also of kind of despair. But step two, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, is like, but there's hope. There's hope. There is a power outside of ourselves that can, maybe we could, if you don't like the word sanity because it implies that you're insane, then you could just actually use the word wholeness. That came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to wholeness. But let's be honest, Jeff, everybody's insane at one level or another. It's just, where are you on the continuum of insanity? Like, if we just use the old trope, right, that insanity is repeatedly doing the same thing, expecting different results. Well, guess what? Name me one person that is not caught inside that loop in multiple areas of their life.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that every step does, by the way, is it calls us to a new humility. And humility is actually a wonderful experience, emotional experience. Like, it is a lot of work to play God. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with playing God.
Yeah, just a bit.
Yeah, and we do not have the resume. We do not have the training for this position. So you know what it's like when you're in a job that's too big for you. It's a really scary place. But yet, that's where people tend to gravitate toward.
Yeah. You mentioned surrender briefly, and I think there's a common misconception about surrender. Explain how this differs from simply giving up, and how it can become an empowering act for us rather than a disempowering one.
Yeah, again, this is a spiritual paradox. And so, the faith that I believe in has tons of paradox. Tons of it. This is one of them, right? Do you remember watching the old Monty Python movie? What was it?
History of the World?
The Holy Grail one, where there's a knight and King Arthur comes along and they get into a battle with each other because Arthur's trying to cross a bridge and this guy's guarding it. And he cuts off one of his legs. Arthur cuts off one of his legs and the guy says, it's just a flesh wound.
Right.
And then he cuts off another leg and he's on the ground. He's just like on the ground, right? And he's like, keep fighting, you. Literally, he says, you yellow bastard. And the guy and Arthur's like, I just cut off both your legs. Don't you want to give up yet? And then he cuts off an arm. Then he cuts off the other arm. And the guy still wants to fight. Like some people just don't know when to give up, right? And they're just on the ground, and you're like, okay, dude. I mean, we're running out of limbs, right? And the thing is that you said there is a misunderstanding. Surrender is not resignation. Resignation is a really bitter place to get to, right? It's like, all right, I'm beaten, blah, blah, blah. And it's this glum kind of resentful space. Like life has done this to me. That's not surrender. Surrender is this open-handed posture, like that is sort of like, again, it's a humility. It's taking a knee and actually recognizing the power and authority of something greater than you that actually can direct and guide your life, where you have to dethrone yourself from being in charge of your own life and not giving up responsibility, but just saying, ultimately, my life is directed by a power other than my own.
I think the next step, step 4, can intimidate people because it calls for deep introspection, which you liken to hugging the cactus. What advice would you give to someone maybe hesitant to face what they might uncover about themselves?
Well, I have a lot of advice for that. So just for your listeners to know, like if you were to break down the steps, 1, 2, and 3 would read like this. 1, I can't. 2, God can. Step 3 is, I think I'll let him. Okay, that's pretty simple.
Yeah.
So what are you doing there? You're mending and deepening your relationship with God, your higher power, right? That's what that's about. 4 through 7, which we're hitting now, are about mending and deepening your relationship with yourself. 8 and 9 are going to be about mending and deepening your relationship with others. And then 10 through 12 is going to be, okay, well, how do I maintain health and growth in each of those 3 domains of my life moving forward? And then lather, rinse, repeat. We go back to the beginning and we start over because there's no graduation ceremonies for this program. Okay. So 4 says, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Listen, a life that is absent of self-examination is a disaster waiting to happen. We have to understand ourselves. I became known for the Enneagram, which is all about understanding what's happening in our interior world, looking at that which is best about us and that which is not so great about us. What business leader doesn't take a regular inventory of their business? If you don't, what happens? Disaster. In the same way, we have to look inside ourselves and go, what is contributing to the problems, the breakdowns in my life, so that I can address those things, own those things, and begin to live at a higher level of functioning in the world. Yeah. So, self-examination, super, super important. Now, that process isn't one of where we shame, blame, and beat ourselves up and do all that stuff. The steps are really clear about that. It's just saying, okay, let's just open the ledger here and figure out what's in the plus column, what's in the negative column, and begin to own those parts of ourselves that are self-limiting, self-destructive, and cause problems in relationships with ourselves, others, and God.
You hinted a bit at some of the next steps a moment ago involving our relationships with other people, sharing our deepest flaws with somebody else. To put it mildly, can feel risky. You present it as a liberating act. Talk about the power of admitting your wrongs to another person. How does that vulnerability contribute to the healing?
Yeah. So step 5, admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. So when you go through step 4, you're going to find some stuff out about yourself that is awesome and really not so awesome. You're going to unearth things like affairs, substance use, lying, not doing things in business that were unethical or borderline unethical. You're going to learn things about yourself that, there are times when you're a liar with your full knowledge or not, right? You're just going to learn some unpleasant truths about yourself. Now, to sit with that on your own is not tenable. In the Christian sacred texts, there's a book called James, and in it, he says, confess your sins to one another that you might be healed. Now, that's actually found in numerous religious traditions, that there is a power in confessing to another human being the exact nature of your wrongs. And in the absence now of sort of churches, synagogues, and other things being at the center of communal life, that's what therapists end up being. So, look, there's a power in it. And here's where the real power is. I remember doing my 5th step with my sponsor and looking him in the eye and telling him things about myself that I was deeply ashamed of. Going back to childhood. And the most powerful words I heard over and over again, oh, yeah, me too. Oh, yeah, I did that. Oh, and what you realize is that you're not as bad as you think, but you're not going to find that out until you actually sit with somebody else and tell them everything about you. As my sponsor tells me all the time, he goes, Ian, not everybody needs to know everything about you, but at least one person does. At least one person needs to know everything about you. And that shouldn't be your partner. It shouldn't be your children. It shouldn't, or your best friend. It really ought to be somebody outside of that circle who can look at you with complete neutrality and say, yep, you just, welcome to the human race. You did all the stuff humans do. I had this sponsee once and they said, I'm the worst of all sinners. And I said, don't flatter yourself. Right? I'm like, you're just another bozo on the bus, pal. Like, you're not the first person to have an affair. You are not the first person to have those thoughts. You're not the first person to make those mistakes. Just, get on the boat and sit in the middle, not in the front, not in the back. Just sit in the middle and be with everybody else. And when you do it, man, I'm telling you, there's a liberation and a peace that comes over you after doing that exercise where it's like, wow, I'm okay. I'm all right.
I like that. Don't flatter yourself.
Yeah.
You mentioned humility a moment ago. Steps 6 and 7 focus on willingness and humility to let God remove character defects.
Yeah.
How do these steps help move someone from relying on themselves to trusting a higher power? And what did this shift look like in your recovery?
Yeah, well, this is really important stuff you're into here. Because when you hear these steps, people we call them the flyover steps because people just fly over them. They think, oh yeah, well, this is easy. For step 6 is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7 is humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. And what's so important about this is that most people, and now I'm speaking specifically to people who are people of faith, they're really involved in a project of reformation. They don't know it, but what they're really trying to do is fix themselves. And I remember when my sponsor looked at me one day early in my recovery, and he said, he's from East Tennessee, man. He's got this thick Southern accent. He's all country. And he says to me, he goes like this, he goes, Ian, we are well past any conversation about you fixing you. Because, I mean, Jeff, let me ask you in your experience. Let me just ask you a question. When it comes to deep change, deep transformation in your life, have you tried to fix yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. How's it going?
Not well.
No, because you're in a reformation project. You're trying to fix yourself. You know the old trope, the same consciousness that created the problem can't solve it. What I would say is that what we want is transformation. We need someone else. This is a big idea. We need someone else to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And by the way, that's the gospel. That's called grace. That's what grace does. It does for us what we cannot do for ourselves. Now, I just feel so bad for people who are trying so hard to be good. It's like, why are we making this so hard? You can't. Like, you just can't. Now, what would happen if we gave God consent to heal us, to remove those character defects and defenses that repeatedly upend our lives? And most people are like, yeah, but I got to try harder. And I'm going, well, then you just don't really understand this gospel thing. If try harder, that is you trying to stay in control. That's you now trying to say, I still want to play God, but now I want to play the good God. I was just going to try and, jam virtue into my life. And I'm like, that's called taping fruit to trees. That's what you see where I'm going?
Sure.
Like, true spiritual transformation happens when we give God consent to bring about deep change in our lives. And then suddenly when you do that, fruit organically just starts popping out on the tree, and it's real stuff. It's not the product of self-determination.
And you kind of get into that whole discussion too. As a believer myself, if I can just be good and get there, then Jesus's sacrifice wasn't necessary.
Yeah, and you just pat your old ego just pat itself on the back and say, "Didn't I do a good job?" And what even worse, you'll do the false pride thing where you're going to say, "Oh, just look at what God has done in my life." And it's like, actually, you had nothing to do with that little move of yours, and you're just actually putting a Christian overlay on it, and it's absurd. If that sounds too passive for people, I'm always like, I have repeatedly seen it happen in my life over and over again, where I have simply said to God, when it comes to this envy problem I have, I'm out of ammo. Like, I have tried everything on my own unaided willpower to solve this problem. You, God, are going to have to do the work in me. And so all of my spiritual practices, everything is aimed at giving God access to the deepest parts of me so that those things can be healed.
The next couple of steps kind of go hand in hand as you combine them in the book. And they're ones that most people who have any sort of familiarity with the 12 steps recognize. And that's the sort of the making amends process.
Yes.
Well, what guidance would you offer someone grappling with fear or pain when revisiting past wrongs?
So these 2 steps, right? Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. That's 8. 9 is made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. All right, check this out. If I asked you, Jeff, to sit down and write out the names of everyone in your life that you have hurt, or in any way, shape, or form, going back to your earliest memories, how long would the list be?
Pretty long.
Pretty long.
Yeah.
Right. It's actually, can I just tell you something from my own experience, having done this with people many, many times? It's a hell of a lot longer than you think it is.
Okay.
When you sit down and really start to do a process of self, you're going to realize, guess what? Nobody gets off this earth without hurting a lot of people. And we only just tend to think of the top 3 or 4. It's like, oh yeah, we'll really sit down and think about it. Like all those hours at work, did it hurt your kids? Did it hurt your wife? I could just go on and on with this, right? Like we have a lot. And then we also have a lot of resentments too, that get stirred up in step 4 in that rigorous moral inventory. And what we also come to realize is that we participated in some of those problems. We had a piece of it. They make it onto our step 8 list. So here's the deal. We are taught very clearly in Scripture that broken relationships with other people has terrible consequence. And it is incumbent, it is our obligation to go back and make amends to people we have hurt. In fact, don't even bother according to Scripture, don't even bother. If you get to church and realize that you've got outstanding business with somebody that needs healing, leave immediately and go fix it and then come back. It's amazing to me that we don't, teach our children at the very least, just how to normalize making amends. So I'll give you an example of making an amends, right? It happened 2 weeks ago. I'm with my son. He's 27 years old. He's a great kid. I'm in Los Angeles. I'm in the back of a Waymo driverless taxi with him. We're going from Santa Monica to West Hollywood. In the middle of that trip, I realized that I had been carrying a lot of guilt and shame about decisions I had made when he was younger that had really hard consequences for him. And so I turned to him and I said, Aiden, I feel like I need to make an amends to you now. And he looked at me and he went, go on. Now, Aiden also works the 12 steps, so he knew what was coming. And I just shared with him as a dad, I feel like I let you down here, and I think it had really hurtful effect on your life. And I want to ask your forgiveness. And he looked at me and he goes, well, of course, Dad, And in that moment, a new kind of intimacy and love was formed between us. I mean, making amends is scary at first, but I just wish people understood the amount of psychological weight they're carrying around because of broken relationships that need healing with parents, with brothers and sisters. And we're just carrying it around, and it's a huge drag on the ship.
I noticed you dedicated the book to Aiden.
Yes, I did, and that's because we have a shared journey of recovery.
Yeah. Talk a bit, if you would, Ian, about continual self-examination, taking a daily inventory to catch mistakes early. How does this practice help prevent relapse and sustain recovery?
Yeah. So listen, step 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So I'm going to tell you about a story that was not my shining moment. It's 100 degrees outside. It's humid. It's like, I feel like I'm living in the tropics. I'm not in a great mood. I get to my favorite coffee shop. There's a line out the door. And I'm annoyed because what I realize is that there's a new barista, and she's very chatty and very cheerful. And she is talking to every customer at length about their lives, despite the fact that there's 50 people in line, right? Yeah. Now I'm from New York, so I'm not very patient with people like this, right? So I get up to my place in line after about 25 minutes. And she says, honey, what can I get you? And I said, I'll take a cortado. And she holds up 2 different kinds of milk and she goes, how would you like it? And I said, I'd like it today. Not a great moment, right? And I've got all this resentment stirring up and whatnot. So she makes the cortado for me. She hands it to me in a very low voice so that others can't hear. She goes, here's your cortado, jackass. Oh. All right. So now, not good, right? So I'm on the way home. I call my sponsor and I'm like just railing about this woman. And he's so patient. He just listens. He goes, do you think this is a good opportunity to practice step 10? And I knew what he meant. He wanted me to turn around and go back there and make an amends for my being a jerk. So I go back. The place is kind of quieted down at this point. And I go up to her and I say, listen, I was just in here a moment ago and I was a jerk. And I just came back to apologize. She got all puddle-eyed and she's like, oh my gosh, I was thinking the same thing. I was in a bad mood and I just suddenly was, I dumped some of my stuff on you. And then I realized I learned her name. I learned why she moved to Nashville. I learned all this stuff from her and I get a free cortado and the 2 of us are friends, right? And it's like, isn't that kind of how life should be? Shouldn't we be people of peace? People of kindness, people who look for restoration, reconciliation, to be people known for our ability to own our stuff and move on. I mean, and if, by the way, I'd gone back there and she had refused my apology, that's okay too. I swept my side of the street. I need to keep my side of the street clean. Here's the thing about addicts, which is all of us, remember, these kinds of ruptures create internal resentments and distress. And so these sorts of things, that kind of distress is the kind of thing that can lead to a relapse. Now, for me, you just have to add them all up, right? Sometimes you got to get 50 of those in a row before, there's a problem. It's just about living the life that we're called to live. And when you don't live the life you're called to live, it causes distress, which can lead to your looking again to fixes that are not of God for internal problems. And then your life becomes a mess again.
I love that story, by the way. That's a great story. Talk a bit about some intentional practices, things like prayer and meditation.
Yes.
To sort of elevate spirituality, I guess, is one way to put it. What tips would you offer or share with someone maybe new to those practices?
Yeah. So step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. People who don't know about recovery programs, right? They think they're self-help programs. They are not. Let me repeat. The 12 steps is not a self-help program. All right. Because I always say, if yourself could have helped yourself, wouldn't yourself have already done it? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like I always laugh when I go into self-help sections of bookstores, because I'm like, if this is a self-help section, why are we looking to someone else for help? Why are we looking for other authors to tell us what to do? Right. It's like kind of a strange, kind of mutually contradictory ideas, right? Right. We have to have spiritual practices that support this new way of life in the steps, a life where we're deepening and guarding our relationship with God, ourselves, and others. And so things like prayer and meditation are really important to improve our conscious contact with God. What does that mean? So as a person in 12-step recovery, what we're taught all the time is we want to wake up. We want to wake up. We don't want to just think about God in the morning. We want to think about God all day long. We want to be in conscious contact with God about every decision we make, about every move that we make, about every thought that we have, about every feeling that we have. We want to be in continual conversation with God throughout the course of the day. You know the story of Brother Lawrence and his book, a very old book, hundreds and hundreds of years old, Practicing His Presence, it's called. And he was a monk living in a monastery, and his goal in life was to have God at the forefront of his attention 24 hours a day. That's the goal. And all those practices, all they do is make it easier for us to do that. And that's really important in the life of a person who's trying to stay sober, but forget again the addiction thing. Because I know there are going to be people out there who are going to be like, it's not my problem. Okay, all right, fine. But have I actually said anything so far in the course of this interview that wouldn't actually dramatically improve your life? Yeah. So, I'm always about trying to take ideas like this and present them to people in a way that's enjoyable, clear, simple, but not dumbed down, so that they can apply them and have access. I mean, listen, Jeff, a lot of, 12-step meetings happen in basements of churches, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm always thinking to myself, as someone who is an Episcopal priest, I think to myself, does anyone upstairs have any idea of what the hell is going on down here? Like, do they have any idea of the amazing miracles that are happening in the basement of this church next to the boiler room downstairs? And I'm like, I wonder if the pastor knows that there's stuff going on down here that if it got loose upstairs would really change people's lives.
Right. And that's what you're trying to do through the book, right?
Exactly. It's like, guess what, everybody upstairs? The stuff downstairs could be yours too. Let's give it a shot.
I love that. How does step 12, the last step, help finalize this process and bring purpose?
So having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics or our fellow sufferers, let's just say, and to practice these principles in all our affairs, right? So, here's the thing. First of all, inside of each of those steps, there is a spiritual principle. That's what we say in the world of the 12 steps, right? And we want to live by those principles. So step 1, it's honesty. Step 2 is hope. Step 3 is faith. Step 4 is integrity. Step 5, confession, right? 6 is willingness. 7 is humility. 8 is love. 9 is responsibility. 10 is discipline. 11 is spiritual awakeness. And 12 is service. So we have a saying in our tradition, right? Like, you can't keep something that you don't give away, right? So we try to practice these principles in all our affairs. And here's the thing. Notice those first 4 words, having had a spiritual awakening. That is the stated purpose of the steps. It is not to fix your problems. It is to have a spiritual awakening that will fix your problems. So now, who's in the driver's seat? God. It's no longer you. And listen, as a pastor, I meet people of faith all the time, and they just think they're killing it. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. They just think they're killing it. And I'm like, oh dear, this is a problem, right? And they think, I got this God thing buttoned up, man. I got it buttoned up. And I'm always like, oh, it'd be so much better if you just owned up to the truth that you don't have it all together and you need help. You need help from God, and you need help from other people to be the best expression of yourself in the world. And you also need a plan. And here's a plan for it, right? Called the 12 steps to accomplish that. And it's beautiful because guess what? God gets to do 99.9% of the work, right? And even the 0.1 you bring to the table is grace. God actually gave you the desire to do that 1.1%. You didn't even generate that on your own. And so, like when you finally get it, and by the way, have you noticed how fun this conversation has been?
Yeah, it has been for me. I hope it has been for you.
Okay, it has been, right? Has it been glum?
No.
Has it been humorless?
No.
My point is that the journey of working the steps is hard. There are moments of tears, but ultimately it's a story and a plan of joy. It's a story about getting free. It's a story about living the life you always wanted. It's a story about having a life that is integrated and runs with less friction through the world. That's what I want for everybody, and that's what the book says everybody can have if they work the steps.
You talk a bit about some imposter syndrome you suffered from. I think it was after the release of The Road Back to You.
Yes.
And what I'm getting at is in the epilogue, you reflect on recovery as a lifelong process. You're constantly having to reflect on these things. It's not a one and done, right?
No, it's not a one and done. You don't go through the 12 steps, get a certificate and move on.
Yeah.
Right? Like the point of the steps is, yes, the first time you go 1 through 12, you do them in order, you follow the directions to the letter, and you get what you get. But I work the steps every single day, and I plan to for the rest of my life. So, there are here's an example. That story about my son in the car. I'm in the car. I have this feeling in my heart, and my heart says, this is an opportunity to make an amends. And so I went, time to do a step 9. And then other times I have an argument with somebody and it brings up all kinds of resentment and anger in me. Time for me to do a searching, fearless moral inventory of myself. And I sit down and I write out my resentment, why I have it, and what my part is in it. I run into, a problem, or let's say I have a moment of discouragement and I'm like, gosh, here I am again. And then I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Hope, right? And it's like, again, I'm working the steps every day, right? So, and then every couple of years I go through them thoroughly again.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed this, as I knew I would. And as I said before we started recording, I have looked forward to meeting you for quite a long time. And I'm glad that day has finally come. Ian's book, again, is called The Fix: How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. Ian, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Jeff, what a delight. It was a great interview.
For a summary of this episode, the links and resources discussed, for connecting with Ian online, and much, much more, simply visit the show notes page for this episode. That can be found at readtoleadpodcast.com/565 for episode 565. One more time, that's readtoleadpodcast.com/565. With Game 4 of the Eastern Conference Finals happening on the day this podcast episode is released, I just want to say, go Indiana Pacers. In the nearly 12 years I've done this show, I don't think I've ever talked about my affinity for Indiana sports and movies like Hoosiers and Rudy, but I guess it was bound to happen eventually. If your team's no longer in the race, I hope you won't hold it against me for cheering mine on. Hey, thanks for joining me for this special episode with Ian Morgan Cron. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. He packs so much wisdom into this book. I definitely recommend you go out and get it right now. Have a great week, a great month, and a great year.